You are just one step away from turning your mind into something no one would ever want. A poor mindset. A small change could help you stop being weak and create opportunities that help you succeed in life, just like they did for me. Therefore, there is a word that I want you to pay very close attention to right now. A word that millions of people use to describe their situation, a word that feels accurate, a word that carries the weight of genuine experience and genuine frustration. And that is, despite all of that, one of the most quietly destructive words in the entire vocabulary of human self-understanding. That word is stuck. You are not stuck. I want to say that clearly, directly, and without any of the hollow enthusiasm that sometimes accompanies declarations of this kind in the motivational space, because I mean it in the most practical and most specific sense available. You are not stuck. Stuck implies immobility. Stuck implies that the forces acting on your situation are so much larger than your capacity to respond to them that genuine movement is not available. Stuck implies that what you are experiencing is a condition of the world rather than a condition of your approach. And what I have observed across decades of sitting with people who describe themselves as stuck, in their careers, in their finances, in their relationships, in their sense of purpose, in their daily experience of their own lives, is that almost without exception they were not stuck at all. They were moving. They were working, they were trying, but they were doing something wrong. Not wrong in the moral sense. Not wrong in the sense that requires blame or shame or any of the other heavy responses that the word wrong sometimes triggers. Wrong in the specific, practical, entirely correctable sense of applying an approach that is not aligned with the results they want, and continuing to apply it day after day and year after year with the genuine and admirable persistence of someone who is working hard, while the results they are working toward remain stubbornly unavailable. And that specific, practical, entirely correctable wrongness is what I want to spend our time together today dismantling. Because the moment you understand what you have been doing wrong, not as a judgment but as a diagnosis, everything changes. The immobility that felt like a condition of your world reveals itself as a condition of your method. And methods can be changed. Starting today, starting now. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to stop doing it wrong and start doing it right, because what I am about to share with you is the specific, practical, philosophy-driven framework that has changed the direction of more lives than I can count, and it is available to you completely in this conversation. Stay with me. Do not go anywhere. Every word matters. I am Jim Rohn, and I want to begin with something honest. The title of this conversation, You Are Not Stuck, You Are Just Doing This Wrong, contains a promise that I take seriously, because I know that the people who are drawn to a title like this are not casual browsers. They are people who are genuinely in the middle of something difficult, people who have been trying, really trying, with genuine effort and genuine intention, to build something better in some specific area of their lives, and who have arrived at a place of genuine frustration because the trying has not been producing the results that the trying should, by any reasonable measure, be producing. I know that place. I have lived in it. I have sat across from hundreds of people who were living in it. And I want to tell you something that I believe with everything I have, something that has been confirmed for me more times than I can count across a lifetime of this work. The frustration you are feeling is not evidence that you lack the capacity for what you are trying to build. It is evidence that something in your approach needs to change. And that is extraordinarily good news, because capacity is difficult to build. Approach is relatively easy to change. You already have the capacity. What we need to find is the approach. And that is exactly what we are going to do today. Let me begin at the beginning, not the beginning of the philosophy, but the beginning of the specific diagnostic that I believe is the most important first step for anyone who finds themselves working hard without the results to show for it. And that diagnostic is this: before you change what you are doing, you need to understand why what you are currently doing is not working. Not in the vague, generalized sense of I need to try harder or I need to be more disciplined. In the specific, precise, honest sense of identifying the exact mechanism by which your current approach is failing to produce the results you want. Because effort applied in the wrong direction does not produce results proportionate to the effort. It produces results that are systematically misaligned with the effort, results that feel, to the person investing the effort, inexplicably modest given how much they are putting in. And the natural response to inexplicably modest results is to invest more effort, to try harder, to push further, to redouble the commitment and increase the input. And when that additional effort also fails to produce results proportionate to the investment, the conclusion that tends to follow, the the conclusion that feels logical and evidence-based and entirely reasonable, is that something is fundamentally wrong with the person doing the trying. Not the approach, the person. And that conclusion, that specific, damaging, almost universally incorrect conclusion, is where the feeling of being stuck is born. Not from the genuine absence of capacity, from the misattribution of a method problem to a person problem. And the misattribution, once made, is self-reinforcing. Because a person who believes they lack the fundamental capacity for something will not invest the genuine inquiry required to understand why their method is not working. They will simply try harder within the same broken method, confirm that the harder trying also does not work, and deepen the conviction that the problem is them. Breaking this cycle, and it can be broken at any stage by anyone willing to bring genuine honesty and genuine curiosity to the diagnostic, is the most important first step available to someone who describes themselves as stuck. Most compassionate and most useful thing I can offer. The most common specific method problem is this: working hard on the wrong things. Not being lazy, not lacking discipline, not failing to invest genuine effort. Working hard, sometimes heroically hard, on activities that feel productive and that are genuinely demanding and that fill the available hours with the satisfying texture of busyness, but that are not, in fact, the specific activities most correlated with the results that matter most. I have watched this play out in careers. The person who spends 40 hours a week doing competent, reliable, well-executed work in the category of tasks that their organization values and rewards at a certain level, while consistently deferring the specific category of work, the creative work, the relationship-building work, the strategic thinking work, that would move them into a genuinely different category of contribution and compensation. They are working hard. They are genuinely working hard, but they are not working on the right things. I have watched it in personal development. The person who reads prolifically, who devotes hours each week to consuming the books and the podcasts and the content that the personal development space produces, but who never makes the specific, uncomfortable, vulnerable transition from consuming the ideas to applying them in the specific situations of their actual life. They feel productive. The consumption feels like investment. But consumption without application is not investment. It is a sophisticated form of avoidance that wears the clothing of growth. I have watched it in relationships. The person who invests enormous energy in the maintenance and the management of the surface of their most important relationships, the logistics, the planning, the social calendar, the gifts and the gestures and the remembered occasions, while consistently avoiding the specific category of engagement, the honest conversation, the vulnerable sharing, the genuine inquiry into the other person's inner life, that would actually deepen the connection they say they value most. In every one of these cases, the person is working hard. They are not lazy, not undisciplined, not lacking in commitment or intention. They have simply and entirely understandably, given the specific discomfort of the right work, directed their effort toward the things that feel like progress rather than the things that produce it. And the distinction between feeling like progress and producing it is the most important distinction in the entire diagnostic of why a genuinely hardworking person is not getting the results their effort should be producing. And here is the question that I want you to bring to your own specific situation right now. The question that, honestly answered, will tell you more about why you are where you are than almost anything else I could ask you. In the area of your life where you feel most stuck, where is the effort actually going? Not where should it be going? Not where do you intend for it to be going? Where is it actually going? If you look honestly at how you spend your time and your energy and your attention on a typical day in that area. Because the answer to that question is the diagnosis. And the diagnosis is the beginning of the cure. Stay with me because in a few minutes I am going to walk you through the specific framework I have developed for redirecting effort from the things that feel like progress to the things that actually produce it. And I promise you that what I am going to share is more actionable and more immediately applicable than anything you have encountered on this subject before. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now because this channel exists for exactly this conversation, and there is so much more ahead. Let me tell you about a man I worked with. I will call him Thomas, a composite drawn from many real conversations across many years, who came to me in his late 40s with a specific and deeply felt version of the stuck experience. He had been in sales for 20 years. He was competent. He was reliable. He was, by any reasonable external measure, a successful professional. But he had been earning approximately the same income for 8 years. Not declining, not growing, simply flat, in the specific and frustrating way that a plateau feels when you know you are capable of more. He had tried various things to change it. He had attended training programs and read the relevant books and worked longer hours in the seasons when he was most motivated. None of it had produced the breakthrough he was looking for. And he had arrived, by the time we spoke, at a version of the familiar conclusion, not stated explicitly, but present in the subtext of everything he said, that perhaps this was simply his ceiling. That 8 years of flat performance despite genuine effort was evidence of a genuine limit rather than a method problem. I spent about 20 minutes asking Thomas questions about how he actually spent his professional time. Not how he intended to spend it, but where the hours actually went on a typical week. And what emerged was a picture that was, to Thomas, genuinely surprising. The overwhelming majority of his professional time was going to account maintenance. To the existing clients, the relationships already built, the revenue already earned. This work was important. It was real and necessary and genuinely valuable. But it was not the work that would grow his business. The work that would grow his business, the prospecting, the relationship building with potential new clients, the developing of new categories of offering, was receiving on a typical week perhaps 4 or 5 hours of his available professional time. Not because he did not know this work was important. He knew it was important, but because it was uncomfortable in a specific way that the maintenance work was not. It required the tolerance of rejection, the management of uncertainty, the willingness to invest effort in relationships that might not produce results. It required, in other words, a specific category of courage that the maintenance work did not. And so, entirely unconsciously, Thomas had constructed a professional life that was full, genuinely full, with real work and real effort and real competence. But that was full primarily with the work that was comfortable rather than the work that was productive. He was not stuck. He was doing it wrong. And when he changed the allocation of his effort, when he committed, specifically and measurably, to investing a minimum of 15 hours per week in the growth activities rather than the maintenance activities, his income grew by 40% in 18 months. The capacity was always there. The method was the variable. I want to extract from Thomas's story the principle that I believe has the broadest application across every domain of life, because I think it is one of the most important and most consistently operative principles in the entire landscape of why genuinely hardworking people do not get the results their effort deserves. And that principle is this: effort naturally migrates toward comfort, not toward impact, not toward the activities most correlated with the results that matter most, toward comfort, toward the familiar, the manageable, the activities that produce a reliable and immediate sense of competence and progress, even when those activities are not the ones most connected to the outcomes we genuinely want. This migration happens unconsciously. Nobody decides consciously to spend their effort on the comfortable activities at the expense of the productive ones. It happens through the simple mechanism of preference. The comfortable activities feel better to do, they produce less anxiety, they offer more immediate feedback, they require less tolerance of uncertainty and rejection and the specific kind of vulnerability that the most important work almost always requires. And so the comfortable activities gradually, invisibly, without anyone consciously directing this outcome, come to occupy more and more of the available professional and personal time, until the person is genuinely busy, genuinely working hard, and genuinely not making progress toward the things that matter most. The diagnosis of this pattern, the specific, honest recognition of it in your own life, is the beginning of the cure. Because once you can see it, you can choose differently. You can make the conscious, specific, measurable decision to redirect a defined portion of your effort from the comfortable activities to the productive ones. Not all of it. The maintenance matters, the relationships already built deserve their care, the existing commitments deserve their attention. But enough of it. Enough to move the needle. Enough to discover, as Thomas discovered, that the capacity for breakthrough was always there, waiting for the effort to find it. Now let me speak about something that I think is the second most common specific method problem I observe in people who are genuinely hardworking and not getting the results they want, and that is the problem of inconsistency masquerading as effort. This is subtler than the wrong things problem and in some ways more painful because it involves people who are actually working on the right things, who have correctly identified the specific activities most correlated with the results they want, but who are applying those activities inconsistently enough that the compound growth they should be producing never actually accumulates. Let me give you the picture that I think captures this most precisely. Imagine someone who has correctly identified that writing for an hour every morning is the practice most likely to develop the creative skill they want to build. They begin the practice with genuine commitment. For 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they show up every morning, they write for an hour, the practice is genuine and the effort is real. And then a busy week comes, a week of travel or illness or unusual professional demand, and the practice is interrupted for 5 days. And when the busy week ends, the practice is resumed, but with a slightly different quality. The gap has introduced a subtle but real discontinuity in the sense of identity around the practice. Before the gap, the person was a writer who writes every morning. After the gap, they are a person who was writing every morning but then stopped for a while and is now trying to restart. And that difference, that apparently small narrative shift, makes the resumption harder than the original beginning. Because beginning something new has the energy of novelty and decision. Resuming something interrupted has a different energy, the energy of recovery, of reestablishment, of proving again something that was already proven and then lost. And this cycle of beginning, disruption, difficult resumption, and eventual abandonment before the next beginning is the cycle that keeps people perpetually in the early stages of the practices they most need to build, never quite accumulating enough consistency for the compound growth to become visible, perpetually experiencing the frustrating asymmetry between the effort invested and the results produced. This is not being stuck. This is inconsistency doing its quiet and enormously consequential work. The solution to the inconsistency problem is not willpower. I want to be clear about that because willpower is the solution that most people reach for, and it is the wrong tool for this specific job. Willpower is a finite resource. It depletes under stress, under fatigue, under the accumulated pressure of a genuinely demanding life. And the moments when the daily practice is most likely to be interrupted are precisely the moments when willpower is most depleted. The busy weeks, the difficult periods, the times of unusual demand and unusual stress. Building a daily practice on willpower is building it on exactly the resource that will be least available precisely when it is most needed. The right tool for the consistency problem is not willpower. It is identity. Specifically, the identity of someone for whom the daily practice is not an optional activity that willpower can either maintain or surrender, but a non-negotiable expression of who they are. The writer who writes every morning does not maintain the practice through willpower. They maintain it because not writing would require them to be someone other than who they have decided they are. The investor who saves every month does not maintain the practice through willpower. They maintain it because not saving would represent a violation of an identity they have built and invested in and that they value more than the short-term comfort of spending. The person whose health practice is non-negotiable has not found a superior reserve of willpower. They have made a different kind of decision, a decision about identity rather than behavior, and that decision is structurally more durable than any behavioral commitment that depends on feeling motivated to maintain it. Here is something I want you to feel with real specificity right now, because I think it is one of the most practically important things we have discussed today. Think about the daily practice, the specific, named, particular activity that you have started and stopped the most times in your life. The one that you know is important, that you have committed to repeatedly, that you have maintained for periods and abandoned in others. Now ask yourself this question. Have you ever made a genuine identity decision about that practice? Or have you only ever made a behavioral commitment to it? Have you decided I am someone who does this? Or have you only decided I am going to do this? Because those are two entirely different decisions with two entirely different relationships to difficulty. And the one that survives the difficult week is always the identity decision. Very soon I am going to show you exactly how to make that identity shift. The specific internal work that converts a behavioral commitment into an identity anchor, and it is the single most important thing I can give you today. So stay with me and tell a friend about this channel, because conversations like this one are what we do here every single week. I want to talk now about what I consider to be the third specific method problem that keeps genuinely capable people from building the lives they are capable of building, and it is perhaps the most philosophical of the three, though I want to assure you it is no less practical for being philosophical. The third method problem is operating from the wrong time horizon. And what I mean by that specifically is this. Most people make their daily decisions on a timeline of days or weeks, when the results they want are produced on a timeline of years or decades. And the mismatch between the timeline of the decisions and the timeline of the results creates a systematic and entirely predictable pattern of effort and abandonment that feels, from the inside, like being stuck, but that is, from the outside, simply the natural consequence of applying a short-term decision-making framework to a long-term investment problem. Let me make this as concrete as possible. The person who wants financial freedom, who genuinely wants the specific experience of having enough resources that their choices about how to spend their time are governed by what they value rather than what they owe, is trying to build something that compounds across decades. The daily decisions required to build it, saving, investing, living within one's means, making the consistent, unremarkable, individually small financial choices that compound into financial freedom over time, are decisions that produce almost no visible evidence of progress on a day-to-day or even month-to-month basis. The person making those decisions cannot look at their bank account after 3 months of faithful financial discipline and see something dramatically different from what was there before. They can see something slightly different. The direction has changed. The trajectory has shifted. But the magnitude of the change is modest relative to the magnitude of the investment, and that modesty, the specific frustration of investing real effort and seeing only modest immediate evidence of its working, is precisely the point at which most people either abandon the practice or conclude that they are doing it wrong, when in reality they are doing it exactly right, and the only thing they have wrong is the timeline against which they are measuring the results. I have said many times, in many different ways, that the great tragedy of compound growth is that it looks like nothing is happening for a very long time before it looks like everything is happening all at once. The mathematics of compound growth are not linear. They are exponential, and exponential growth has a characteristic shape, flat for a long period, then suddenly and almost vertically steep, that is completely counterintuitive to a mind that is calibrated for linear relationships between effort and result. We expect the graph to be a steady, proportionate climb, more effort producing more result in a consistent and visible way across time. What compound growth actually produces is a long, frustrating plateau followed by an explosion of results that seems, to anyone who has not been watching the accumulation, to come from nowhere. The person who abandons the practice during the plateau never experiences the explosion. They experience only the plateau, which they interpret as evidence that the practice does not work, and they take that interpretation with them to the next attempt, where the same pattern plays out again. And this cycle, this specific, predictable, heartbreaking cycle, is what produces the feeling of being permanently stuck in people who are actually on the edge of a breakthrough that the consistency of one more season would have delivered. The correction for the wrong time horizon problem is the development of what I call the long game orientation, a specific and cultivated relationship with time that allows you to maintain the right daily practice on the right long-term timeline without the constant, progress-checking anxiety that short-game thinking produces. And the long-game orientation is built from 2 specific capacities that I want to describe as concretely as I can. The first is the capacity for process satisfaction, the ability to find genuine satisfaction in the quality of the daily practice itself, independent of the magnitude of the visible results it is currently producing. The person with strong process satisfaction does not need the harvest to be happening right now in order to feel the work is worthwhile. They find something genuinely rewarding in the act of showing up, of maintaining the standard, of doing the thing with care and intention and consistency. They find satisfaction in the discipline itself, in the specific experience of being someone who keeps their commitments to themselves, that is available every day, regardless of what the scoreboard currently says. This is not resignation. It is not the consolation prize of someone who has given up on results. It is the specific orientation that makes the consistency possible, the internal reward system that sustains the practice through the long plateau that precedes the explosion of results. The second capacity is the capacity for evidence-based trust, the ability to maintain confidence in a process not because of what it is currently producing but because of a genuine understanding of why it produces what it produces. The investor who understands compound growth does not panic when the market is down and the short-term results are modest. They understand the mathematics well enough to know that the process is sound, that the conditions for the long-term result they are building are being established, and that the short-term modesty of the current evidence is not a contradiction of the long-term thesis but a predictable feature of how compound growth actually works. Build both of these capacities, process satisfaction and evidence-based trust, and the long-game orientation becomes available to you. And with the long-game orientation, the entire experience of working toward what matters most changes. The plateau becomes evidence of accumulation rather than evidence of failure. The modest early results become the expected and entirely acceptable first chapter of a story that is going to be extraordinary in its later chapters. And the daily practice becomes not a burden but a privilege, the specific daily expression of a commitment to the long-term life that the compound growth is quietly and patiently building. Let me now go deeper into something that I touched on earlier in our conversation but that deserves its own full exploration, and that is the relationship between fear and the specific category of wrongdoing that keeps most genuinely capable people from the results they are capable of producing. Because I want to be honest about something that I think is often euphemized in the personal development space. The something wrong that I am describing throughout this conversation is, in a very high percentage of cases, not really a skills deficit or an information deficit or even a discipline deficit in the conventional sense. It is a fear response. A specific, often unconscious, entirely understandable but enormously consequential fear response to the specific category of activity that is most likely to produce the results they want. The entrepreneur who knows they need to have a difficult financial conversation with a potential investor but who finds reason after reason to defer it is not lazy. They are afraid of rejection, afraid of judgment, afraid of the specific vulnerability of asking for something important and being told no. The professional who knows they need to pursue a promotion but who consistently finds reasons not to have the conversation with the decision-maker is not lacking in ambition. They are afraid of being seen as presumptuous, afraid of revealing a desire that might not be reciprocated, afraid of the specific discomfort of wanting something openly and not getting it. The person who knows their most important relationship needs a difficult conversation but who keeps managing the surface of it instead is not indifferent to the relationship. They are afraid of what the conversation might reveal, afraid of the vulnerability of honest engagement, afraid of the specific and very real possibility that the conversation will be more complicated than the avoidance. Fear, in the context of personal development, is not a character flaw. It is a completely understandable evolutionary response to activities that feel threatening, even when the threat is social or emotional rather than physical. But fear, when it is allowed to govern the allocation of effort, when it is allowed to invisibly redirect activity from the productive to the comfortable, from the courageous to the safe, produces exactly the pattern we have been discussing throughout this conversation. Genuine effort, genuine busyness, genuinely modest results, and the frustrated, bewildered, genuinely unfair sense of being stuck when in reality you are simply being governed by a fear response that has never been brought into conscious examination. The examination of fear, the specific, honest, compassionate inquiry into what exactly you are afraid of and what specifically that fear is costing you, is one of the most important and most courageous acts available to a person who is genuinely trying to build something better. Not to eliminate the fear. Fear does not eliminate, but to understand it clearly enough to choose, consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of what is at stake, to act in its presence rather than to defer to it. That specific choice, the choice to do the thing you are afraid of, not because you have conquered the fear but because you have decided that the cost of not doing it is greater than the discomfort of doing it, is the choice that breaks the wrongdoing pattern more reliably than anything else I know. I want to tell you something about courage that I think is one of the most important and most practically useful things I have learned across a lifetime of studying how people build extraordinary lives. Courage is not the absence of fear. I have said this before, but I want to go deeper into it here because I think the implications are more radical than they first appear. If courage were the absence of fear, then courageous action would be available only to people who do not feel afraid. And in reality, those people are quite rare, and the things they do not feel afraid of are rarely the things worth being courageous about. The people I have observed who build the most genuinely remarkable lives, who take the risks worth taking, have the conversations worth having, pursue the work worth pursuing, are almost universally people who feel genuine fear in the face of those things. They feel it. They do not minimize it or deny it or manage it away before acting. They act in its presence. And what they have discovered, what I believe you will discover, if you commit to this practice, is that the fear does not prevent the action. The action actually diminishes the fear. Not immediately, not by a dramatic amount in any single instance, but consistently, cumulatively, in the specific and compounding way that everything in a disciplined life compounds. Each act of courage in the face of fear builds the specific capacity for further acts of courage. The person who has done the scary thing once has evidence that it is survivable. The person who has done it 10 times has a track record. The person who has done it 100 times has a relationship with their own courage that is so deep and so confirmed by experience that the fear, while still present, has become something they recognize and acknowledge and walk past rather than something that stops them. Now I want to give you the most specific and actionable framework that I have developed for anyone who recognizes themselves in the patterns we have been discussing. The person who is working hard on the wrong things, the person whose consistency is perpetually disrupted before the compound growth can accumulate, the person who is operating on the wrong time horizon, the person whose fear is quietly governing their effort allocation without their full conscious awareness. And I want to be genuinely practical here because this is the point in the conversation where the philosophy has to become instruction, and instruction has to become daily action, and daily action has to become the new pattern that replaces the old one. Very soon, in the next section of what I want to share with you, I am going to walk you through what I call the 4 recalibrations, the specific adjustments to your daily approach that, applied consistently, will change the results your effort produces more dramatically than any increase in the volume of the effort itself. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs it today, because these 4 recalibrations are the most direct answer I know to the question of how to stop doing it wrong and start doing it right. The first recalibration is the recalibration of your effort allocation. And the specific practice I am recommending is one that sounds simple and is not the daily, honest, written accounting of where your effort is actually going, followed by the deliberate, specific, measurable decision about where it should be going instead. Not in the vague sense of I need to spend more time on what matters. In the specific sense of, in this specific domain of my life, the activities most correlated with the results I want are these specific 3 things, and I am committing to investing a minimum of this specific number of hours per week in those specific activities, starting this week. The specificity is not bureaucratic. The specificity is what makes the commitment real. A vague commitment to do better has no accountability. A specific commitment to invest 15 hours per week in growth activities rather than maintenance activities has a number you can check against and a gap you can see and a daily decision you can make that is either consistent with the commitment or not. Specificity creates the feedback loop that vagueness cannot. And the feedback loop is what makes the change sustainable. The second recalibration is the identity recalibration I described earlier, and I want to give you the specific internal practice that makes it real rather than merely conceptual. The practice is this: for each daily discipline you want to build into your life, right, in your own words, in whatever phrasing feels genuine and true for you, the identity statement that makes the discipline an expression of who you are rather than a behavior you are trying to maintain. Not I am trying to write every morning. I am a writer who writes every morning. Not I am trying to save 15% of my income. I am someone who invests in their financial future consistently and without exception. Not I am trying to exercise regularly. I am someone whose physical health is a non-negotiable daily priority. These statements sound simple. They are simple. But the simplicity conceals an enormous amount of work, the specific internal work of deciding who you are, and then living from that decision rather than from the feeling of any particular moment. Write the statements. Read them every morning. Not as affirmations in the feel-good sense, as reminders. As the daily restatement of a decision that was made and that does not need to be remade each morning, only reaffirmed. The practice of daily reaffirmation keeps the identity decision fresh and operative in the moments when the temptation to deviate from it is most present. The third recalibration is the time horizon recalibration, and the specific practice here is the development of what I call the milestone map, a written, specific, time-index picture of the progression from where you are now to where you want to be, with realistic intermediate milestones that allow you to assess whether you are on track without demanding the final destination to have arrived before it is time. The milestone map serves 2 critical functions. It makes the long-game timeline visible and specific rather than abstract and vague, which makes it psychologically more accessible and more motivating. And it provides the specific intermediate evidence points that allow process satisfaction to be grounded in something concrete. Not in the vague feeling that you are generally moving in the right direction, but in the specific, verifiable recognition that you have reached milestone 3 of 7, and that milestone 3 being reached means milestone 4 is within reach, and that reaching milestone 4 will mean you are genuinely more than halfway to the destination. This progression, made visible, made specific, mapped against a realistic timeline, transforms the experience of the long plateau from a formless stretch of frustrating stasis into a comprehensible and navigable journey towards something that is real and getting closer. The fourth recalibration is the fear recalibration, and this is the one that requires the most courage to implement, but that produces, in my experience, the most dramatic and most immediate change in results. The practice is a weekly audit of avoidance. Every week, I recommend Sunday evening, as the transition from the week ending to the week beginning, you sit with a journal and you ask yourself one question. What did I avoid this week that I know I should have done? Not in general. Specifically, The conversation I did not have. The call I did not make. The opportunity one did not pursue. The creative work I put off. The vulnerable engagement I managed around. You name each thing. You name the fear that drove the avoidance as specifically and honestly as you can, and then you make a specific commitment to do that thing in the coming week. Not someday, in the coming week, on a specific day, at a specific time, with a specific action defined well enough that you will know, at the end of the week, whether you kept the commitment or whether you avoided again. This practice does not eliminate avoidance immediately, but it makes avoidance visible, which is the first step toward choosing differently. And each week that you keep the commitment, each week that you do the thing you were afraid of, that you have the conversation you were avoiding, that you make the call you were deferring, is a week in which the evidence changes. The fear does not disappear, but the track record of acting in its presence builds. And that track record, accumulated week by week, becomes the most powerful antidote to the fear-governed effort allocation that has been producing the stuck experience. Let me now take a step back from the specific recalibrations and speak about something that underlies all of them. Something that I believe is the most fundamental shift required for anyone who wants to genuinely change the pattern of their effort and their results. And that shift is the shift from a fixed understanding of yourself to a growth understanding of yourself. These terms have become somewhat commonplace in recent years, but I want to give them the specific meaning I intend rather than the general meaning they have acquired in popular usage. A fixed understanding of yourself is the implicit belief, almost never stated explicitly, almost always present in the background assumptions, that who you are is largely settled, that your capacity for discipline is what it is, that your tolerance for risk is what it is, that your ability to sustain effort through difficulty, to build new skills, to change the patterns that have been producing your current results. These are essentially fixed quantities, the product of your nature and your history, available to be deployed but not fundamentally augmented. A growth understanding of yourself is the belief, again, rarely stated explicitly but powerfully present in the background assumptions of the people who hold it, that who you are is the product of your choices and your practices and your sustained effort at development, and that who you can become is considerably larger than who you currently are, and that the gap between those two things is navigable through exactly the kind of daily, consistent, compounding investment we have been discussing throughout this conversation. The person with a fixed self-understanding, encountering the wrong things problem or the inconsistency problem or the wrong time horizon problem, tends to interpret those problems as evidence of their limits. The person with a growth self-understanding, encountering exactly the same problems, tends to interpret them as information, as specific and correctable method problems that the right adjustment can address. The interpretation is not trivial. It determines everything that follows. Because the interpretation governs the response, and the response governs the outcome, and the outcome either confirms or refutes the interpretation, in the circular and self-reinforcing way that all fundamental beliefs about ourselves tend to confirm or refute themselves through the behavior they produce. I want to speak now about something that connects everything we have discussed today in a way that I believe makes it not just intellectually coherent but emotionally compelling, and that is the idea of what I call the right kind of discontent. There is a discontent that is destructive, the discontent that generates resentment and bitterness and the specific paralysis that comes from being angry about where you are without being committed to doing anything specific to change it. I have seen this discontent in many lives. It is a genuine pain, and it produces nothing. But there is another kind of discontent, a discontent that is productive, even essential, and that is the discontent of a person who has a vivid, specific, emotionally real picture of what they are capable of building, and who finds their current distance from that picture genuinely unacceptable. Not in a self-punishing way, in the specific, motivating, forward-looking way of someone who is not willing to accept the distance between their current results and their potential results as a permanent condition. This is the discontent that Earl Schoaf awakened in me at 25. Not the discontent of a man who felt bad about where he was. The discontent of a man who suddenly understood, with vivid clarity, what was possible, and found the distance between that possibility and his current reality genuinely unacceptable. That discontent was the most productive thing that ever happened to me. It was the engine of everything that followed. And I want to help you access it, not as a source of pain but as a source of energy. The specific, directed, purposeful energy of someone who has looked honestly at both where they are and where they could be, and has decided that the distance is navigable and that the navigation begins today. You are not stuck. I want to say that one more time, clearly and directly, because I want it to be the thing you carry most centrally from everything we have discussed. You are not stuck. You are a person of genuine capacity who has been applying a method that is misaligned with the results you want, and that misalignment is specific, diagnosable, and correctable. The wrong things problem is correctable through the deliberate recalibration of your effort allocation. The inconsistency problem is correctable through the identity shift from behavioral commitment to identity decision. The wrong time horizon problem is correctable through the development of the long game orientation and the milestone map that makes the long game visible and navigable. The fear-governed effort allocation problem is correctable through the weekly avoidance audit and the specific practice of doing the thing you are afraid of on a defined timeline. None of these corrections require extraordinary talent or extraordinary circumstances or extraordinary willpower. They require the specific, daily, consistent practice of a different approach. And a different approach is available to you, starting today. Starting with the specific, honest diagnosis of which of the four method problems is most operative in the area of your life where you feel most stuck. Starting with the specific, named, daily action that the diagnosis points toward. Starting with the decision, the genuine, dated, identity-level decision, to be someone who does it right rather than someone who does it hard. I have spent a lifetime in the specific business of believing in people before they believed in themselves, of seeing the potential in a room full of people who had not yet seen it in themselves, and offering them not false encouragement but the genuine and evidence-based belief that the capacity for an extraordinary life is not rare, not reserved for the specially gifted or the extraordinarily fortunate, but available to anyone who is willing to examine their method with honesty, correct what is not working, and maintain the right approach with the patience and the consistency that compound growth requires. That belief is what I am offering you today, not as a courtesy, as a conviction, because everything I have observed across a lifetime of this work tells me that the feeling of being stuck is almost always a method problem wearing the costume of a capacity problem, and that the method problem, once seen clearly, is always correctable. You can correct it. You are correcting it right now, in the specific act of bringing genuine attention and genuine inquiry to the question of why your effort has not been producing the results it should. That inquiry is the beginning. The action that follows it is the middle. And the life that the right action, maintained consistently, produces, the specific, abundant, deeply satisfying life that your capacity has always been pointing toward, that is the ending that is still entirely available to you. My friends, I am genuinely grateful for every minute you have given to this conversation. The time you invest in genuine inquiry into how you are living and how you could live better is among the most important investments available to you, and I do not take lightly that you have chosen to spend a portion of it here. I hope you leave today not just inspired but specifically equipped, with a clear diagnosis of what has been producing the stuck experience, with the 4 specific recalibrations that will correct it, and with the identity-level decision to be, from this point forward, someone who does it right rather than merely someone who does it hard. Because doing it right, maintained consistently over time, produces results that doing it hard, in the wrong direction with the wrong timeline, governed by unexamined fear, simply cannot produce. The life you are capable of is real. It is specific. It is available. And it is waiting for the right approach, applied with the right patience, to reveal itself in the harvest that compound growth always eventually delivers to the person who does not stop planting. Subscribe to this channel now. Watch the next conversation. Share this one with someone who is in the middle of their own stuck experience and who needs to hear that it is a method problem, not a capacity problem. Because this community, the people who are choosing to examine their approach and correct what is not working, is where the real work happens. And we are just getting started. I want to say something now about the cumulative effect of the 4 recalibrations applied together over a sustained period. Not just the effect on the external results, though the effect on external results is significant and real, but the effect on the internal experience of daily life. Because I think this is the dimension of the change that is most difficult to describe in advance and most powerful to experience in practice. When you have been consistently applying the effort allocation recalibration for several months, something changes in the quality of your daily engagement with your work. The sense of busyness without progress, the frustrating, vaguely guilty sense of having been busy all day without having done what mattered most, begins to diminish. In its place grows a different quality, a sense of alignment, of being genuinely engaged with the things that most need your engagement, of ending the day with the specific, earned, quietly satisfying sense that you moved the most important things forward. This is not the frantic satisfaction of a productive day in the conventional sense. It is something quieter and considerably more durable. The specific contentment of someone who is building what they intend to build through the daily, deliberate, intentional choices that only a genuine effort allocation recalibration makes possible. When you have been consistently applying the identity recalibration for several months, the relationship you have with the difficult daily choices changes. The choices that previously required a significant expenditure of willpower, the early morning when the alarm sounds and the bed is warm and the discipline seems optional, begin to require less. Not because the alarm is less early or the bed is less warm, but because the choice has been made at the level of identity rather than behavior, and identity decisions do not need to be remade each morning. They need only to be reaffirmed. And reaffirmation, once the identity is genuinely settled, requires considerably less energy than decision. The person who has genuinely decided they are a writer who writes every morning does not spend energy on the decision each day. They spend energy on the writing. And the writing, not the deciding, is where the compound growth lives. When you have been consistently applying the time horizon recalibration for several months, the plateau stops feeling like failure and starts feeling like accumulation. The modest early evidence of compound growth, the small but real progress that the milestone map makes visible even when the destination is still far away, provides the specific, grounded, evidence-based confidence that sustains the daily practice through the long seasons when dramatic visible results are not yet available. You begin to trust the process, not blindly, not because you have abandoned the honest assessment of whether it is working, but because the milestone map is giving you the intermediate evidence that confirms it is working, even in the seasons when the scoreboard does not yet show it. And when you have been consistently applying the fear recalibration for several months, the emotional landscape of your daily professional and personal life changes in ways that are difficult to describe but impossible to miss once they begin. The specific relief of no longer having things you are avoiding, the specific lightness of being someone who faces the difficult thing rather than managing around it, is one of the most significant improvements in the quality of daily experience that any practice I know can produce. Because avoidance is not free, costs something every single day. The weight of the unfinished conversation, the deferred call, the avoided decision. These things do not sit in a neutral zone while they wait for you to get around to them. They sit in a drain on your cognitive and emotional resources, consuming attention and generating the low-grade anxiety of the thing left undone. Removing them through the specific, courageous, weekly practice of doing the things you have been avoiding frees those resources for the things that actually deserve them. Now let me talk about something that I want to address very specifically for a particular group of people who I believe are watching this conversation and who face a version of the stuck experience that has some unique characteristics that deserve their own treatment. And that is the person who has tried the kinds of approaches I have been describing, who has read the books, attended the seminars, made the commitments, built the practices, and who found that it worked for a season and then stopped working. Or who found that it worked in some areas but not others. Or who found that the motivation produced by a great conversation or a great book was genuine and real in the moment but proved impossible to sustain against the accumulated weight of daily life beyond a week or two. I want to speak to that person directly because I believe their experience is not evidence of a fundamental failure of the approach. It is evidence of a specific and correctable gap in the implementation. And the gap is almost always in one of two places. Either the vision was not specific and personal and emotionally vivid enough to provide the daily motivational fuel that the approach requires, or the daily practice was not small enough and specific enough and embedded deeply enough in the existing structure of daily life to survive the inevitable disruptions that real life produces. These are not small gaps. They are the gaps that determine whether the approach produces the compound growth it is capable of producing or produces instead the cycle of motivated beginning and discouraged abandonment that most people have experienced multiple times. And closing them, making the vision more specific and personal and vivid, making the daily practice smaller and more specific and more deeply embedded, is the work that converts a good approach into a sustainable one. I want to address the question of smallness one more time, because I think it is the dimension of sustainable daily practice that is most counterintuitive and most consistently underestimated. We are culturally inclined to believe that significant results require significant practices, that the gap between where we are and where we want to be must be closed through actions that are proportionate in their size and drama to the size and drama of the gap. This belief is one of the most consequential misconceptions in the entire landscape of personal development. The practices that actually produce the most significant long-term results are almost never proportionate in their apparent size to the results they produce. 30 minutes of daily reading does not feel like something that will close the gap between your current professional capacity and the capacity required for the career you want. But 30 minutes of daily reading, maintained every day for 3 years, produces a person who has spent more than 500 hours in deliberate, focused engagement with the ideas most relevant to their professional development. And that person is genuinely, measurably, categorically different from the person who did not. A 10-minute daily practice of reviewing the vision is not, in any individual instance, a dramatic investment. But 10 minutes of daily vision engagement, maintained over 2 years, is a practice that has kept the most important thing visible and emotionally real through 730 days of choices that either move toward or away from it. The smallness is not a limitation. The smallness is what makes the consistency possible. And the consistency is what makes the compound growth real. Always make the practice small enough to do on the hardest day. Because the hardest day is not the exception. It is the test. And the practice that survives the hardest day is the practice that eventually changes everything. Let me now bring something into this conversation that I think is one of the most important and most neglected dimensions of a genuinely successful life, and that is the relationship between the quality of the inner life and the quality of the outer results. I have spent considerable time today talking about the practical, behavioral dimensions of doing it right, the effort allocation, the identity, the time horizon, the fear management. All of that is real and important and immediately actionable. But beneath all of it, more fundamental than any of the specific practices, more durable than any of the specific strategies, is the quality of the person doing them. And the quality of the person is determined, ultimately, not by their external achievements or their disciplined behaviors, as important as those things are. It is determined by the quality of their inner life, the depth of their wisdom, the richness of their self-knowledge, the genuine alignment between their stated values and their lived choices, the specific quality of peace and purpose that comes from being someone who is genuinely trying to build something that matters and who is doing so in a way that they can honestly respect. I have known people who had all the right behaviors and none of the inner depth, and what their lives produced, outwardly impressive, internally hollow, was one of the most sobering and most instructive things I have ever witnessed. And I have known people whose outer results were modest by any external measure, but whose inner lives were so rich and so genuinely purposeful that their daily experience was one of the most deeply satisfying I have ever been close enough to observe. The inner life is not a luxury. It is the foundation of everything. And the daily practices that cultivate it, the silence, the reflection, the genuine self-examination, the reading of wisdom, the cultivation of gratitude, the discipline of honest self-assessment, are not supplementary to the practical work of building a better external life. They are what make that practical work genuinely worth doing and genuinely sustainable over the long arc of a human life. I want to close the main body of this conversation with something that I consider the most important single insight I can offer anyone who has been feeling stuck, who has been working hard without the results they deserve, who has been wondering whether the capacity for the life they imagine was ever really theirs to begin with. And it is this. The feeling of being stuck is almost always the feeling of standing at the beginning of the compound growth curve, on the flat part, before the exponential acceleration, in the season where the evidence of accumulation is real but modest and the destination is still far enough away that the distance feels discouraging rather than navigable. It is not the feeling of someone who has reached their limit. It is the feeling of someone who has not yet reached the threshold where the compound growth becomes visible. And that threshold, the point at which the accumulation of daily disciplined investment begins to produce results that are dramatically disproportionate to what any single day's effort would suggest, is closer than it feels. Always closer than it feels. Because the curve is steeper than it looks from the flat part. And the breakthrough, when it comes faster and more dramatically than anything the plateau prepared you for. Your job, the specific, daily, concrete, courageous job that this conversation has been equipping you to do, is to maintain the right practice on the right timeline, through the right vision with the right courage until the threshold is reached. Not until you feel like it is working. Not until the evidence is unmistakably clear. Until the threshold. Because the threshold always rewards the person who does not stop planting. The harvest always comes. The compound growth always, eventually, makes the flat part of the curve look like the most important season in the entire journey. The season when everything that follows was being built, invisible but real, in the daily discipline of someone who had decided that the life they were building was worth the daily cost of building it. You are that person. You have always been that person. The only thing that needed to change was the method. And now you have the method. Use it. Beginning today. My friends, I am filled with genuine and deep gratitude for everything you have brought to this conversation. The attention, the honesty, the willingness to sit with questions that are uncomfortable and ideas that require something of you beyond passive reception. You are not stuck. You have never been stuck. You have been a person of genuine capacity who was applying a method that was not aligned with the results you were capable of producing. And now you have the diagnostic, the framework, the 4 recalibrations, and the daily practices that will change that alignment, and with it, change the results. The rest is yours to do. It always was. And I believe with everything I have that you are going to do it. Begin today. Begin with the one practice, the one recalibration, the one identity declaration that addresses the most important method problem in the most important area of your life. Begin imperfectly. Begin modestly. Begin with whatever is available to you today in the actual conditions of your actual life. And come back here, to this channel, to these conversations, because every week we go deeper into the specific philosophy and the specific practice that make a genuinely designed life not just an aspiration but a daily, compounding, increasingly abundant reality. Subscribe now if you haven't already. Watch the next video. Share this one with someone who needs to hear today that they are not stuck. They are just doing it wrong, and wrong can be fixed. I will see you in the next conversation. Keep going. The threshold is closer than it looks.